Hey there, wicked listeners. As always, I'm your host, Jan Ruud, and you are listening to Wicked Crimes. Remember in my previous episode when I told you I strongly suggest you follow me on social media? Well, if you haven't yet, do it quickly, because until end of March, you still have a chance to enter the first ever Wicked Crimes giveaway. The first of the two prizes is a signed copy of Nicole Engelbrecht's latest book, Bare Bones. In this book, she revisits some of the cases that she has covered on her own podcast and even gives you a few updates where progress has been made in the cases. Nicole brings her normal, outstanding writing ability to these stories and again lends her voice to the victims. Of course, that's not all. With a signed copy of the book, you'll also receive a Wicked Crimes branded travel cup. Of course, when we had the prize made, there was no way I would not have one made for myself as well. And I must say, I'm loving it so far. Not only does it look amazing in my opinion, but I got my cup just in time for a record-breaking heat wave here in Cape Town. And for about a week, that was the only drink container I would touch. Seriously, in the middle of a heat wave, I went to bed at night with ice water, and by 10 a.m. the next morning, it was still super cold. The competition, unfortunately, is only open to South African citizens, and the winner will be announced on the 1st of April 2026. To enter, just head over to the Wicked Crimes group that can be found in the show notes, find the competition post, and follow the instructions. With that out of the way, I do want to still encourage you to both join the Wicked Crimes group and follow the Wicked Crimes Facebook page. The reason for that is that the group is an opportunity for me, you, and all the other listeners to discuss not only the cases I cover, but any other cases we might find interesting. The page, on the other hand, is a very useful tool for me to share updates and information regarding the podcast itself with you. Now with that out of the way, let's hop into episode 9, Thandazile Mpunzi.
Please be advised that this podcast contains content that could be harmful to some listeners. This includes, but is not limited to, strong language and graphic descriptions of violence, sexual activities, assault, and death. This podcast also engages in discussion regarding various religions, spiritual beliefs, and practices, some of which might be harmful or triggering for some listeners. Please reconsider before consuming this content. The information contained within this podcast is mainly gathered from news articles and official court documents where available. Should you have any more information, or if you know of any incorrect information in this content, please feel free to contact the host through the email found in the show notes.
Thandazile Mpunzi was a normal 20-year-old South African woman living in the most northern parts of the South African province of KwaZulu-Natal, not too far from the Mozambique border. Well, I say she was a normal woman, because I'm certain that she felt that she's nothing other than being absolutely normal. From an outside perspective, however, there was something different about Thandazile. She was born with a genetic mutation that meant her body lacks the melanin pigments, a condition we better know as albinism. I want to take a moment and look at albinism before we get into the case, because albinism plays a massive role in this case, as well as some future cases we will cover. In 2013, albinism was declared as a socially produced disability. This means that the condition itself, while affecting those that has it, does not affect them to the point where it severely disrupts their daily lives. But the social response to people with albinism does. people with albinism often suffer from problems with their sight, including light sensitivity, and they require stronger skin protection, as their skin is extremely sensitive to the sun. This also means that they are at higher risk of skin cancer. While these issues can be prevented and treated, the social plight of people with albinism is not as easily treated. During my research on this case, I found numerous papers and studies but do not focus primarily on the genetic aspect of albinism, but instead on the social aspect. One such noteworthy study was conducted in 1984 here in South Africa. While the verbiage of the study is extremely problematic in its reference to not only people with albinism, but also the Black community, its content was rather telling. This study specifically focused on how people with albinism were being accepted into the Soweto area near the fall of apartheid. It found that while those who do not have albinism seem to be rather accepting of people with albinism, that people with albinism still do not feel that same acceptance. To support this, the study also showed how people with albinism seem to be less likely to enter a long-term intimate relationship, such as a marriage. In essence, while most of the participants of the study said that they accept people with albinism as a part of their community and as equals, the actions of the larger community did not reflect that. The same paper referenced a 1857 paper that claimed that infants born with albinism were often killed at birth, or, if left to live, would be hidden from the rest of society. While I would normally accept published research papers and their accompanying studies as credible, I think it is important that we note the social environments in which these studies took place. A certain amount of skepticism should be used when reviewing these studies. The studies were conducted by white people looking into Black communities who were actively being oppressed by the former at that moment, and would see a severe lack of trust between the two communities that could definitely impact the accuracy of the findings. The final piece of information in this study that I want to bring up is the myths and superstition around people with albinism that this study also pointed out. The first of which is that a person with albinism does not die. They just eventually disappear. We'll break down this myth a bit later in the episode, but it is important to note that in the 1980s, it was already a well-known myth. The paper also referenced the belief that people with albinism possess supernatural abilities. True to South African form, the study concluded that there had only ever been one confirmed case of a person with albinism having supernatural abilities, and this had been when a person with albinism had used clairvoyant abilities to find the lost burial site of an important ancient chief. Unfortunately, I could not find more information on this, but if I ever do, I'll definitely share it with you. Before we continue with the case, there is another interesting piece of information I do want to share with you. While we are focusing on Black people with albinism in this case, and this does seem to be the community in which albinism is most prevalent, it is important that we know and understand that albinism can and does occur in other races as well. In fact, the earliest mention of probable albinism is someone that we all know quite well. The mentions comes from the ancient pseudepigraphia, written around 200 BC. Now it is important to note that the pseudepigraphia is often falsely attributed to authors, and not always included in modern religious canon. However, the time period in which they are written is important here. You see, in the pseudepigrapha, Noah is described as having skin white as snow, white hair, and eyes that shone like the rays of the sun. The problem with this description is that Noah was Arabic. This means that the description of him was quite unusual. It does, however, fit to the description of someone with albinism, which of course means Noah quite possibly had albinism. I bring this up to point out the fact that people with albinism have been with us for ages, if not for as long as humanity has existed. So, albinism is not a new concept, nor is it restricted to only a certain race or certain communities. Yet, in modern times, there are still people who believe that those born with albinism are born so either because they are being punished by God for some reason, or because they have been chosen by God. It is this belief that leads to the belief that the body of a person with albinism is imbued with powerful magic, or at the very least, luck. It is this belief that led Bekukufa Lindeni Gumedi to gather a group of 3 young men in early 2015 and ask them to find and murder a person with albinism so that he can harvest their body parts and use them in a Muti mixture that would bring him and the young men wealth. Gumede was a pastor at a Christian-based church that included and accepted traditional indigenous African beliefs and practices, which allowed him to be a traditional healer as well. This would have given him a greater measure of credibility with the group of men he had approached. This group consisted of Mandla Mabuza and Lendokuhle Kumalo, both aged 20 at the time, as well as a 17-year-old boy. As we well know by now, since the 17-year-old was a minor at the time, I cannot share his identity with you. So, for the purposes of this episode, we'll give him a pseudonym. How about Richard? The 3 young men were offered 25,000 rand to complete their task, an amount of money that could be rather life-changing in rural South African communities. They accepted the offer and set out to find their target. While it's not clear how the group decided that Thandazile would be their target, they quickly devised a plan on how they would bring an end to her life. Kumalo approached Thandazile and attempted to start a relationship with her. This, however, failed, and Thandazile eventually entered a relationship with Richard instead. In early of August 2015, the group enacted their plan, and Richard lured Thandazile to a secluded area in Ngwavuma, in the northern part of KwaZulu-Natal. The boys had gotten clear instructions from Gumede on how their attack on Thandazile was supposed to play out. First, they were supposed to place a silver coin in her mouth, and then speak aloud certain words that would render Thandazile powerless against them. Once this had been done, they were to end her life with their bare hands. In practice, however, the events did not go as planned. Richard attempted to strangle Thandazile, but when he was unable to overpower her, he resorted to stabbing her 3 times, ending her life. In mere moments, Thandazile's life had been taken by someone she had thought was in love with her. With their task now completed, the boys contacted Gumede for further instructions. He told them to hide the body nearby, and the boys did so. Later that day, the boys would return to Thandazile's body, this time accompanied by Gumede. After arriving, Gumede removed some of Thandazile's body parts, including her arm, genitals, and some of her skin. The group then loaded her body into Gumede's car and drove nearly 90 kilometers back to Manguzi, where they disposed of her body in a shallow grave. They then returned to Gumede's home, where he provided them with herbs that they were to use to cleanse themselves, as well as 200 rand, which he told them was for alcohol so that they could fall asleep that night. By the 5th of August 2015, Thandazile's family had not seen or heard from her and reported her missing. Over the following 10 days, news spread around the community of Thandazile's disappearance, and it didn't take long for members of the community to become suspicious of the three men who had recently started to show an interest in her. Following a tip-off, the local police picked up the three men, who very quickly admitted to the murder of Thandazile, and led police to the shallow grave they had left her in. The men also told police about Gumede's involvement, and following the discovery of Thandazile's blood-soaked clothing near his home, Gumede was also arrested. Following a community march in protest of their bail, the men quickly abandoned their bail applications and would remain incarcerated while waiting for trial. Manda Mabuza and Lendokuhle Kumalo did not need to wait long. Both of them pled guilty, and by the 11th of September 2015 were sentenced to 20 years imprisonment. Richard, as a minor, was found guilty in February of 2016 and sentenced to 18 years. Gumede had denied involvement in the case and pled not guilty. His trial, while not heavily publicized, would continue. However, before his trial could be concluded, the community would again see tragedy hit and focus on people with albinism. In July of 2016, a 4-year-old boy with albinism named Banalizwa Ntombela was playing outside a church with his cousins when they were approached by two men who knew Banalizwa by name. The men took Banalizwa, and to date, he has not been found. While police were investigating his disappearance, they were contacted by another local traditional healer. This healer had been approached by a woman offering to sell him a child with albinism for 100,000 rand. The police decided to ask the healer to assist them by going through with the transaction. When the healer met the woman, Mpumi Mabika, he was accompanied by undercover officers posing as his assistants. Mabika, unaware of the sting, brought the 12-year-old child with her and offered the traditional healer 3 more children with albinism aged between 7 and 13. Mabika was immediately arrested. We'll get to the conclusion of her trial in just a moment. Gumede, who had orchestrated Thandazile's murder and maintained his innocence, finally went to trial. During the trial, Kumalo and Mabuza provided the majority of evidence against him, and by February of 2017, Gumede was found guilty. During the sentencing phase, his defense asked the court for a lenient sentence based on the fact that Gumede was HIV positive, a first-time offender, had lost his wife in 2010, was the father of 10 children and grandfather to 22, and then added that he had the respect of the community as he was a pastor. The judge countered the mitigating circumstances by pointing out that Gumede had not shown any remorse for his actions during his trial. Gumede was eventually sentenced to life in prison for his role in orchestrating the murder and mutilation of Thandazile. Kumede's actions had a direct impact on the traditional healer who assisted police in capturing Mpumi Mabika and saving the 12-year-old boy she was attempting to traffic. In fact, it had gotten so bad that the healer had started to fear for his life. While awaiting Mabika's trial, the healer had received threats to his life if he continued to assist police. He had also noticed that both he and his home were being watched. And to top it all off, despite assisting police, the healer claimed that the community still believed that he was somehow involved in trafficking children with albinism. In 2023, Mabika pled guilty to trafficking and received a 20-year sentence. Shockingly, the 12-year-old that she had attempted to traffic back in 2016 had been forced into hiding until the conclusion of this trial. In 2023, when Mabika was sentenced, he was already 18, and for the first time since 2016, was reunited with his family. On the 6th of November 2025, the Department of Correctional Services hosted a victim-offender dialogue in the same community, which included the 4 men involved in Thandazile's murder. Each of the men were given the opportunity to speak to the community, which included Thandazile's family. Richard spoke to the community and told them how he had regretted his actions. He also told the community that when he is released, he has nowhere to go. He apologized to the community and asked them to accept and reintegrate him into the community when the time comes, going as far as to say that if there were any community programs that protect women and people with albinism, that he would be willing to participate as a way to show remorse. Mandla Mabuza also apologized to the community and asked for their forgiveness. He told the community that the correctional services had taught him about respect and that this had been the reason he requested to participate in the dialogue, in order to apologize to the local community and to everyone with albinism. Kumalo also apologized. He told the community how he had learned that his actions were wrong, but he would not repeat them, and if he becomes aware of anyone repeating his actions, he would report them, as he now believes that everyone should live together in peace. Kumede also attended the dialogue, and in contrast to his trial, now admitted his involvement and guilt. He spoke out about how he had once been known for doing good in the community and had helped people with challenges that they faced, but thought that a darkness had overcome him and that he was there to apologize to the community and the traditional healer. The victim-offender dialogue is quite important. While I am one of the first to admit that our justice and correctional service system is flawed and often extremely ineffective, it is important to note that the purpose of these systems are not to simply remove offenders from society as a punishment, but rather to rehabilitate them so that when they return to society, they do not reoffend, but instead become productive members of society. We of course know that more often than not, South African inmates are forced to join gangs while in prison in order to survive, and even when they do not, the stigma of being a convicted offender follows them wherever they go and makes it difficult to build a meaningful life outside of prison. However, there are cases in which our correctional system succeeds in rehabilitating offenders, and this dialogue is an integral part of it, as it forces offenders to come face to face with their victims and admit the damage they have done to them. I understand that it might sound confusing to say that the men should face their victims, when Thandazile was the victim, and she's no longer with us. But this is where secondary and tertiary victims come into play. Thandazile's family has been directly impacted by her murder. During the dialogue, her uncle asked that the family be assisted with both installing a borehole and erecting a fence on their property. The reason for this is that Thandazile has two siblings who both also have albinism. These siblings, like the rest of their family, often need to walk with buckets to retrieve water to drink, cook, and bathe with. As we've already seen, in the 10 years since Thandazile's murder, people with albinism in the community have been continuously targeted. So, it's no surprise that the family still lives in fear. During the dialogue, Thandazile's mother reiterated how whenever her other two children with albinism are not with her, she finds herself in a constant state of fear, continuously checking on them to ensure their safety. Thandazile's sister called for the men not to be released, and noted how she felt that if they were released, she and others with albinism in the community would again be in danger. While I understand her fear, it's worthy to note that these four men are not the only ones in the southern region of the African continent targeting people with albinism. Violence against this specific community has gotten so bad that in 2017 the government of Malawi introduced a system where people with albinism were given panic buttons fitted with GPS tracking, so that when they are attacked, they have a direct and immediate report system to local authorities who would then have their exact location. I could not find more information on this system aside from a few articles noticing its implementation in 2017 and a 2019 article debating the ethical and moral implications of introducing such a system to South Africa. Unfortunately, it also doesn't seem like the system was very effective in Malawi, as it still seems that there is still an increase in violence against people with albinism all over the Southern Africa region. At the start of this episode, I mentioned the myth that people with albinism do not die, but that they simply disappear. In a 2016 article regarding the case against Mpumi Mabika, it is mentioned that activists believe this myth was started by traditional healers, so that people do not question the disappearance of people with albinism. And unfortunately, this logic seems quite sound. To put it into perspective, in March of 2012, a 20-year-old woman with albinism named Nothandazo Mpunzi went missing and has not been found since. In 2013, the bodies of 9-year-old Lindokuhle Madlankala and his 3-year-old cousin were found in an unfinished rondavel. Their uncle was arrested after a traditional drinking bowl filled with Muti and blood was found in his residence. In July 2014, the mutilated body of 4-year-old Lungisani Kiki was found at a church. His stomach and an arm was missing. While a pastor at this church was arrested, he was later released due to a lack of evidence. In February of 2015, the same year as our case, 4 men were caught trying to dig up the grave of a person with albinism who had passed away in 1999. In March 2017, 2 people were sentenced after they murdered and beheaded 2 people with albinism in October 2015 and attempted to do the same with a third. In April 2009, a 6-year-old child was killed when her tongue, heart, and intestines were cut out while she was still alive. 3 people were charged in relation to this. These are only 6 examples of crimes that occurred in South Africa itself. We haven't even looked at our neighboring countries. And these are definitely not all the cases that occurred in South Africa. In Thandazile's case, the belief was that using her body parts to create Muti will bring wealth to those who use that Muti. In every case where a person with albinism has been brutally murdered, the attackers have done so to enrich themselves and their lives in some manner, based entirely on a myth regarding why someone has the albinism gene. In fact, there are those that believe that people with albinism are bad luck. And I'm entirely certain that people with albinism has been attacked purely on those bases. But, for some reason, that is the least likely reason for someone with albinism to be attacked. I cannot help but wonder, how does anyone justify taking the life of one person in the hopes that it enriches their own lives? Even more shockingly, the amount of people caught each year for attacking, murdering, and mutilating people with albinism should be the perfect example to others that these actions will not enrich their lives, but instead land them up in prison. Thandazile's murder in 2015 caused outrage among activists and people with albinism. Yet, more than 10 years later, 3 of her murderers should already be eligible for parole, and people with albinism still face continuous violence. So today, let's keep Thandazile in our memories and use her legacy to bring awareness to the violence people with albinism face on a daily basis. There is no reason for anyone to live in constant fear of being attacked for something like the color of their skin. Thandazile Mpunzi, may you rest gently. And that, dear listeners, brings us to the end of episode 9. Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving us a review wherever you're currently listening. And until next time, be safe, wicked listeners.